Disney movies have not only been a magical experience for us, but they have also taught us that anything is possible in the end, and it is possible to, in fact, live happily ever after. But what if I told you that the original story that you loved so much was much darker, whether the movie being about a princess falling in love with her prince, a god finding his love, or an outcast becoming an accepted part of society? These are 10 Disney movies that have dark roots. Before we continue, please like and subscribe, as it shows me that you're fond of the work that I've been putting out. Number 10, Sleeping Beauty. In the original story, created by Guilherme Batista, Brazil, in 1634, Princess Aurora, aka Briar Rose, was in the forest and shuffling through the woods. This eventually led her to getting a flax splinter in her finger. The prince eventually finds Sleeping Beauty. Well, sleeping. And after trying to wake her up in multiple ways, he decides to have sexual intercourse with her in her unconscious state. Yeah, in other words, he raped her. After committing this foul act, he decides to leave, but little to his knowledge, he impregnated the princess. And after 9 months, her unconscious body gave birth to 2 twins. Eventually, one of the twins made their way over to her finger and began to suck on it. This in turn drew out the splinter, causing Princess Aurora to awaken. Needless to say, I'm happy they switched it up for the Disney version. Number 9, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was originally released by Disney in 1937. However, the story was based off of an old tale by the Brothers Grimm. While for the most part, the stories were on par with it, the ending itself was pretty different. Just a heads up for y'all who haven't seen the movie yet, spoiler alert! In the film, as you could assume, the story ends happily ever after, when Snow White receives a kiss from the prince, which causes her to wake up, after which he takes her to his castle, and they live happily ever after. However, in the original story, the evil queen attends her wedding, which in turn leads her to be recognized. This eventually leads the prince to forcing her into a pair of red-hot iron slippers, which eventually causes her to drop dead. Jeez, I thought my shoes weren't uncomfortable. Number 8, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The Hunchback of Notre Dame shares some similarities with all the other movies, in the sense that the movie depiction has a happy ending. You see, in the movie, Quasimodo saves Esmeralda from a terrible fate. He eventually comes to terms with the fact that she loves another, and he finally leaves the cathedral that he was raised in, enters society as a hero. And this is where the story shares another similarity with the other ones, in the fact that it's much, much darker than the movie. You see, in the original story, Archdeacon Frollo ends up getting the last laugh when Esmeralda is hung after he betrays her, and in a blind rage, Quasimodo ends up murdering Frollo and spends the rest of his days visiting her grave. This in turn eventually leads him dying of starvation. Number 7, Peter Pan. When Disney comes up in conversation, one of the first movies that come to mind is Peter Pan. I mean, how could it not? There's a ton of magic. Kids have the ability to fly. And of course, it's home to 2 of Disney's most iconic characters, Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. One of the interesting things about Peter Pan is that there is a ton of inspiration that comes from life. To be honest with you, it's pretty dark. One example of this is that the Lost Boys were actually based off of the Llewellyn Davies boys, who lost their father back in 1907, and their mother followed soon after, thanks to cancer. Another interesting thing is that the movie never explains what happens to the Lost Boys once they start to grow up. The novel, on the other hand, did give an explanation, and to be honest with you, it's very vague and very dark. The explanation states, when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rule, Peter thins them out. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'm sure it's not a good thing. Maybe Captain Hook was onto something. Number 6, The Fox and the Hound. The Fox and the Hound was one of the few Disney movies that really doesn't have a happy ending. But still, much like the other movies, it was adapted to be more appropriate for children. The story is about a fox who befriends a hound at a young age. However, due to their instincts and their owner's influence, they grow into becoming enemies of one another. Eventually in the movie, the fox risks himself to save his old friend from the bear. This in turn leads the fox to exhaustion, and the hunter tries to take his shot at him. However, thanks to the fox's kindness, the hound returned the favor and prevented his owner from hunting the fox. This leads to both of them to living the rest of their days separated, even though this might have seemed like a dark outcome. In the original novel, it was far, far darker. See, in the original novel, the hound chases down the fox until he's exhausted, and he eventually pushes him so far that he passes away. Years after the death of the fox, the book shows the hunter in his elder years and is making preparations to move to a nursing home. And because he has nowhere to go with his hound, he decides to shoot him dead with his shotgun. Number 5. Pinocchio. In the movie Pinocchio, Pinocchio is a puppet who comes to life, and with the help of his advisor and friend, Jiminy Cricket, pursues his dreams of becoming a real boy. In the movie, his dreams come true. However, in Carlo Cadelli's version, it was quite a bit of a different ending. You see, the original story of Pinocchio wasn't a typical novel. It was actually a multi-issue story that was spread out over multiple Italian newspapers. And the entire purpose of it was to show kids what could happen if they were being disobedient. In fact, the original Pinocchio was so troublesome and cruel that one of the times Jiminy Cricket, or the talking cricket as referred to by the author, tried to give Pinocchio some good advice, he decided to kill him with a mallet. Throughout the story, Pinocchio endures consistent torture, all of which was brought on by his bad behavior. This originally leads the cat and the fox to killing Pinocchio by hanging. Eventually, however, due to fans' outcry, Pinocchio's life was spared, and he was brought back to endure more punishments. Number 4. The Little Mermaid. In the story of The Little Mermaid, Ariel ends up saving a prince from a shipwreck and begins to develop feelings for him. This in turn leads to her making a deal with a sea witch. While the movie and the book were both consistent in the fact that Ariel made a deal to get her human legs, the movie was much lighter, as all Ariel had to do was give her voice in exchange for the deal. The novel, on the other hand, not only required her to give her tongue in the exchange, but she also had to endure the pain of walking on shattered glass every time she used them. Honestly, I have no idea why they would change that. In the movie, Ursula tries to trick the prince into marrying her instead, so Ariel voids the contract, and in turn, leverages this to use against her father, Trident. However, Hans Christian Andersen's version of the story, there is no trickery involved. Instead, the prince marries somebody else because he did not recognize her whenever she saved him, due to the prince not recognizing her. From when she saved him, he ended up marrying someone else. The Sea Witch did give Ariel another chance to save herself, as well. In order to do so, she had to kill the prince. However, this was to no avail, as she couldn't quite bring herself to do it. This eventually leads to her jumping into the ocean and dissolving into sea foam. Number 3. Mulan. Mr. Owl, make a man out of you. In the movie Mulan disguises herself as a man so that she can go to war in place of her elderly father. As time goes on, with the help of Mushu, a small dragon that protects her, she battles her way to becoming a proud and fierce warrior. Her captain sees right through her disguise and decides to dismiss her from the army. However, when she catches wind of the Huns' plans, she strategically confronts her army and assists them with taking them out. Where the difference lies between the novel and the movie is in the movie, she returns home and is celebrated by her family. However, the novel is far more tragic. As in the book's original ending, she ends up coming back home to find that her elderly father has passed away. Her mother has since remarried, and she eventually gets summoned to the Emperor's palace to become a concubine, but then kills herself in order to avoid a life of prostitution. Number 2. Hercules. Hercules is a movie based off Greek mythology. And for all y'all that haven't followed it, it's some pretty intense stuff. You see, in the movie, Hercules' parents, Zeus and Hera, were having a baby shower for the newborn son. Later that night, he gets kidnapped, taken to Earth, and becomes mortal. Eventually, he works his way up to godhood with help of his loving father, Zeus. At the very end, he decides to stay with his love, Megara, as he begins to fall in love with her. In the original story, however, Zeus tricks Hercules' mother, Persephone, into having sexual intercourse with him by taking the form of her husband, Amphitryon. This in turn leads to her getting pregnant, and eventually giving birth to Hercules. Eventually, like the movie, he meets and falls in love with Megara. However, unlike the movie, they end up having 5 children together, and Hera finds out about Zeus's infidelity. Out of revenge, Hera causes Hercules to go mad and slaughter not only Megara, but all 5 of their children. He thought Hades was a bad guy. Number 1. Cinderella. In Disney's version of the classic tale, Cinderella, the story tells of a young girl whose father ended up marrying an evil stepmother, and how she had to cope with the stepmother and her 2 rotting daughters. After hearing of the royal ball and really wanting to attend, the wicked stepmother ensured that she was not going to attend, and instead planned on taking the biological daughters. Eventually, Cinderella's fairy godmother appears to her and utilizes her magic in order to make Cinderella's dreams come true. Cinderella enchants the handsome prince at the ball, but due to time constraints on the spell, she ran away quickly, leaving one of her glass slippers behind. The prince eventually had an event where all the women whom attended the ball were to try on the glass slipper, and whoever it fit, he wanted their hand in marriage. This is what led him to refinding Cinderella, and in the movie, they lived happily ever after. In the Brother Grimm's version of the tale, however, it was much more grim and graphic. One example is when it came to trying on the slipper, one of the stepsisters decided to cut off one of her toes in order to ensure that her foot would fit. This would have fooled the prince, except that little doves notified him that there was blood on the shoe. Realizing that Cinderella was going to be queen, the stepsisters decided they should get on Cinderella's good side, so they decided to attend the wedding, only to have their eyes plucked out. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been 10 Disney movies that have dark roots. If there are any movies that I missed that you felt should have been on this list, please leave a comment below. I always love reading what you guys have to say. Please also take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, as you won't want to miss what's next. Also, if you'd like to check out one of my other videos, please click on one of the links that just popped up, as it'll direct you to one of them. And until next time, I'm calling this case closed.